So here we are with another indie game spotlight, and this time it's for a game called Outward. This video was supposed to be done a few days ago, but the problem is I've been having so much fun playing Outward, I couldn't find time to work on the video. It's a good problem to have, but still I kinda wish I had been able to get it done sooner. Even so, better now than never, so without further ado, let's discuss this brilliant mess of a game. At its core, Outward is about exploration. The game has most of what we would expect from a typical open world RPG nowadays. It has various skill trees, melee, ranged, and magic-based combat, a variety of craftable and lootable items, consumables, gear, and so on. It also has branching choices which greatly impact your relationships with other characters, and a sprawling quest system that spans each of its rather large explorable zones. On a surface level, the game does look really dated. In terms of graphics and core gameplay systems, it has mostly been seen before and done before. A lot of players may wonder what Outward brings to the table that other games haven't or don't, and the answer to that is rather complex. I'll talk more specifically about some of the various systems in just a moment, but the major driving factor behind my own personal enjoyment of Outward seems to revolve around the sum total of all its parts, and an emphasis on meaningful and difficult exploration where decisions really matter, and everything is left up to the player. All too often nowadays, game developers or publishers make the deliberate choice to cater to the widest audience possible. The primary side effect of this is a casualization of game mechanics, sometimes to such an extreme that a little dot, arrow, or line takes players straight from one objective to the next and essentially eliminates all need for them to even think about the game, the world, what they should be, or even what they possibly can be doing. Another common practice is level gating, or utilization of an experience-based progression system that slowly unlocks individual items or skill options. Basically, you get to level 10, you can now use these items. At level 20, now these are available, etc, etc. Alongside a level-based progression system, open-world games usually utilize level-based zones. So when you are level 1, you are restricted to 1 or 2 zones, and as you get stronger, you can actually explore more. It's probably one of the most common video game mechanics in existence when it comes to open world RPGs, but on a foundational level, it is flawed and removes a great deal of player choice. Outward avoids all of these systems and as a result avoids the issues that they bring. Progression has a couple of key moments which happen very early on, but after that, players are free to go anywhere at any time and fight, learn, equip, or explore any of what the game has to offer at their own pace without being restrained by a typical leveling system. Now, I should clarify, there are plenty of enemy types, bosses, and areas which will simply be too difficult for a player to explore without a decent number of hours under their belt and an arsenal of items to give them strength, but the option to at least try is never held back, and if a player should succeed in defeating harder enemies or clearing a massive dungeon, they are able to wield, equip, learn, or use everything that they find without some arbitrary level number assigned to it. The majority of progression occurs through the use of recipes or training skills at various locations. Spread throughout the massive world are a number of different NPC skill masters, each with their own focus. There is a huntsman in the forest region who teaches bow skills, a pistol master in the desert fortress, a mage in an isolated tower north of a spectral pass in the very first region a player explores, and many more as well. These trainers accept coin in exchange for teaching various skills, and again, nothing is locked behind an experience wall or a forced grind in order to meet various benchmarks. If you have the silver, you can get most of the skills, and it contributes to the feeling that inside any building or at the end of any tunnel could be a vendor or a trainer that has the next powerful skill or item that you want, and with that knowledge, the confidence and satisfaction that all of it is within your reach. You can equip all of it or use any of it. There is a robust crafting system which promotes experimentation by combining different items at various stations, and there are some really cool items that you can craft with the right combination of rare materials. Crafting is also key to survival in the vast open landscape because over time your character will get tired, hungry, thirsty, perhaps sick, diseased, hot, cold, or any number of ailments which can all be cured by drinking various teas, brewing potions, mixing stews, and the list goes on. You get the point. The idea of living off the land is perfectly exemplified here. It starts off very hard to do, with a basic backpack, lack of any suitable weaponry, and little to no training whatsoever. But over time, as your abilities pile up, you find legendary or magical gear and unlock a variety of different recipes, the process of adapting to each scenario gets easier and easier with more rewards. There is one key factor here that helps build up a true sense of identity for Outward, and that is your backpack. Your backpack is basically your mobile house. It quite literally holds your tent, your bed, bed, your magical seed hut, or whatever you take shelter in, but beyond that, given the size of the open world and the way combat and regeneration works, your backpack is your mobile base of operations and must be carefully managed to make sure you have an answer to any problem you may encounter. The game seems to promote the idea of choosing which backpack best suits your playstyle and then filling it with supplies, but I was honestly unable to ever find a scenario in which you would want less storage space. I simply could not justify carrying 20 pounds of items instead of 100 pounds of items, not ever, especially given how much a lot of these items tend to weigh. So in one sense, the game succeeds at creating a sense of importance and value regarding your pack, and in another sense, it's just a gimmick where you constantly look for the largest bag possible. When you die, and you will die at one point or another, never fear because your bag, if it ends up being separated from you, will be marked on your map. But don't go get another bag before retrieving your old one, because in my experience, equipping another bag after a death will reset the tracker, and that can mean you never find your supplies again. You'll never typically be very far from your bag, however, when your character does end up dying, there are a bunch of events that can happen depending on location, region, time of day, and a few other things. I don't know the exact specifics, but there are quite a few different factors involved. Based on whatever factors are prioritized, a random event occurs and you awake in prison, in a cave with a demon, back in a city, in a clearing with a nice potion and a note waiting for you, in a hive of insects, and many more. There are quite a few. This type of death and spawn system in one sense is creative and fun, but in another it can be very annoying if you spawn across the map in a hostile hive of insects and then die again and spawn across the other side of the map in a dungeon far away from where you originally wanted to go. I appreciate the attempt to be unique and use random events to keep the game interesting even when you die and would normally lose progress, but it's about 80-20 here. 80% of the time, it's pretty good and normally quite fun, and the other 20% of the time, it's like, what the absolute fuck? Why does this even exist? The combat leaves a lot to be desired, but the thing is, with such an emphasis on loot and managing your inventory, I didn't feel all that upset about cheesy combat encounters. The arrow shooting is super clunky. The melee is better, but the lock-on system is not very responsive, there is a slight control delay, and the best thing I found to do was ignore blocking or any sort of real tactical play and just spam attack until the enemies die. If you get enough damage in quickly, you will end up stun locking pretty much everything that you fight, so it's kind of like every single encounter is just a blitz, hit fast, hit hard, and hope you don't get hit at all. There are some unique and mystical weapons and items out there, and when you find one, it's legitimately exciting. Like, I haven't been that pumped to find a piece of gear in a video game for a very long time. And to again underline that sense of satisfaction and fulfillment, I didn't even know how to become a mage for pretty much my entire playthrough so far. And now that I do know, I've started to work towards building a character that is a bona fide battle mage, and it feels really, really good to do. Since there are no blatant quest markers, actually talking to NPCs and remembering the landmarks that they discuss or the riddles that they give answers to feels really great. Finding a dungeon and then an item that you remember being asked for specifically by an innkeeper or a guard makes what would normally be trivial fetch quests in any other game feel fun and fairly rewarding. A second part to this is stocking up on supplies, talking to an innkeeper, and then embarking on a journey across multiple regions. It takes a long time, but when you finally follow the signs and end up in what feels like a totally new world with new characters, enemies, and locations, it is extremely satisfying. The game starts slow, really slow. You will be retracing your steps quite a bit with a small backpack and no skills or gear, often running loot back to town in order to sell it and afford some upgrades. Honestly, the first few hours are a bit tedious, but after you get just a few key items and skills, it all changes. You start to stay out in the world for much longer and return with huge bags of loot. One thing that isn't for everyone is the amount of travel time. At first, I honestly didn't like it at all, but the game has a huge amount of delayed payoff. Once I got some silver and luckily found a roaming trader with some special merchant type gear, my move speed and carry capacity got greatly increased, and traveling didn't feel bad anymore. The game can certainly feel like a running simulator at times, and in all honesty, the open world can feel very empty in certain areas, but once you get the hang of the compass and remember a few different landmarks, navigating between points of interest becomes quite easy. Another massive benefit is split screen co-op. Not a lot of games have that nowadays. The game is on Xbox One, PS4, and PC with traditional split screen co-op. I feel like that's worth mentioning here. Maybe I'm archaic, but I remember a time when a friend could come over and pretty much any game in your library would allow for another controller to be turned on, and you both jump in game together. That's pretty fucking rare nowadays, and I appreciate this game having it. I disagree with the price though, pretty strongly. $40 is a bit too much. Considering the size of the development team, which if I'm informed correctly is only 10 people, it's impressive that they have managed to craft a game with a content scope this large. But $40 is just, it's too high. 20 would be perfect. 30 would be even alright, but 40 is too high given the clunky combat and the unfortunate presence of a few bugs and issues which can severely impact your playthrough. Personally, I haven't actually had hardly any bugs at all, but I've read about a few that are nearly game-breaking and they really hurt the experience. So all things considered, I respect the game, the developers, and the experience I have had, but 40 feels too high. The game feels like an indie project. It actually feels like an indie project. It's fun, it's beautiful, and it's amazing in a lot of ways, but in others, it falls a bit short. The enemy AI, for instance, can be cheesed 6 ways to Sunday. Sometimes if you go around a corner, it just loses track of you, and you could probably exploit pretty much every fight in the entire game. I know I used some cheap tricks on a few super tough enemies, but it's things like that which should pull it back down from 40 to 30, or preferably 20. Outward has a lot of strengths. It's been a long time since I had that much fun exploring an open world and slowly gearing up my character. Probably the last time was Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, if I remember correctly, and that was years ago. The development team is very small, but they managed to construct a progression system that feels wide open with rewarding exploration and very meaningful choices. The campaign story is not overly interesting, at least not from the beginning, but it does pick up quite a bit as you start to make some of the more important decisions and visit the more interesting sections of the world. Outward is a game I am happy to have supported, even at a price point I consider to be a bit too high. To any open world RPG fans who like to carefully manage their inventory, dive into a complex crafting system, and slowly explore a vast open world, I can easily recommend the game. The decisions you make on which rare crafting components to keep and which ones to drop even have weight, because if you make the right decisions, you can find yourself with a legendary poisonous bow, and if you make the wrong decisions, you end up poisoned yourself with no antidote. As you first dive in, it's rough around the edges, and it stays rough around the edges, but it's a wonderful game with a lot of passion. They took risks, and most of those risks paid off, and it is well deserving of being covered for the Indie Game Spotlight series. That's it though. I love playing Outward, and I also love exploring indie games to help offset some of the shitty AAA practices that just keep showing up nowadays. If you have any recommendations for future indie spotlights, feel free to leave them in the comments down below, or send me a direct message. I try to respond to everything. This is easily my favorite series that the channel has ever done, and I look forward to continuing it. Outward has a lot going for it. Check it out if you have any interest, and certainly consider it if they offer a sale. If you want to support the channel, check out the links down below, but that's it. I'll cut it there and stop rambling. Thank you all for watching, and have a nice night.